So once again, a very warm welcome to the viewers of Ambedkar Karwan. As you know that on the occasion of Dhamma Diksha 65th anniversary year, we are celebrating it with talks for next today and next 3 days. And we will be having this conversation with intellectuals and people from all over the places. Today we have in the second seminar, a very popular name in India as well as abroad, Vidyabhushan Rawat Sahab, whose contribution to the social justice movement, the humanistic movement, Buddhist movement is immense, and he has dedicated his entire life for this goal of serving the communities through whatever ways, of course, peaceful ways by which he can. He's a prolific writer. He writes on all the issues of social concern and economic concern. He's a filmmaker who has done some wonderful documentaries, and he's a curator of the movement. I would say that he's a curator of a movement in the sense that he has curated lives and works of great people like Bhagwan Das, to name a few. And this invaluable work that he has produced in the course of his many years of engagement with the communities is a historical trove of documents related to our movement. So I welcome Brother Vidyabhushan on this occasion, and without taking further time, I would like to just say how grateful we are for Vidyabhushan Bhai Sahab to join this conversation. And his topic today is Buddhism, a quest for humanistic society, which is very dear to him because he is well known in the humanistic circle. He has been a part of the international humanistic network, and he has been a very vocal member about the humanism and anything that goes against humanism. So here you are, brother. So I hand it over to Brother Vidyabhushan to make a presentation for the next minutes, and we will then discuss further. Brother,
welcome and greetings to all on the Dhammachakra Pravartan Divas. It's a great honor, Mangeshji, to be with you and speaking to all the Ambedkarite friends world over and all the Buddhist friends. So my greetings and welcome to you. I call this Dhammachakra Pravartan Divas a very historic events of Indian history, and I call it India's greatest non-violent revolution. Now, this terms, a few days back, I was invited by a group of young activist academics, students, and they wanted me to speak on non-violence and in the current scenario, why it is so important. And when I started explaining things about non-violence and about Dr. Ambedkar's whole movement, there was a lot of surprise for people because normally in Indian context, we always use non-violence as a tool by Gandhiji. And I said that there are two kinds of non-violence. Non-violence can be used as a tool by the status quoist also. And non-violence used by Buddha or used by later stage by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar is a completely ideological position, a very strong statement. So when we are speaking about Buddhism, I would like to emphasize that I speak as an Ambedkarite, and my Buddhism and my understanding of Buddhism comes from his writings, his work, and his life. So I may not be called a very, who can speak on different phases of Buddhism in other parts of the world, like Mahayana or Hinayana and others. But my focus is how Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar defined it and what it is. And nearly 15 years back, there was a big Buddhist, ceremony on this day in Delhi, and I was part of that at the Ramlila ground, and thousands and thousands of people, participated in that ceremony and became Buddhist. and I wrote an article in International Humanist magazine about this is the humanist celebration. And many people ask me the question, how can you call this a humanism? Because there are priests, there are Buddhist bhikkhus, and there were this thing. And then I explained to them that what Dr. Ambedkar defined. And long before this, I can say, and Dr. Ambedkar, studied under John Dewey. So if you glance through Professor John Dewey's writings and his work on humanism, because he defined also, there were a lot of controversies regarding his definition of humanism. But his issue was that he was absolutely a non-believer, but he never hated the God in terms. He never hated those people who believe in religion. So that was his formulation. And but when Baba Saheb Ambedkar defined and what brought him close to Buddha was the Buddhist philosophy, where philosophy is important for human being. The center of the universe of a philosophy or a religion should be human being, and not an eternal thing, what you call God or something else. So Buddha was like the only person at that point in time who defined that philosophy should help the human being. And otherwise, we was always like in Indian terms of eastern part of the world, it was Eko Brahma Dityo Nasti, only the God is great and only God exists, and Jagat Mithya means the word is just, mystery or falsehood. Now, this philosophy was actually created by the what you call Shankaracharya or Vedantic people, and all those who wanted to create illusion and wanted to enjoy the fruits of their hierarchical system. So they created that kind of a philosophy that, Eko Brahma Dityo Nasti, and second, Jagat Mithya. The only God is, truth, and anything else is wrong. I say that is where Buddhism became a very, very powerful instrument. And I quote an American scholar. He said Buddhism and humanism are two geographical sides of the same coin. They are twin with some same DNA, separated by birth, brought up by different parents. And then he goes on. Buddhism is Eastern humanism, and humanism is Western Buddhism. So that the way he defined. And why it is like when we discuss about humanism, many people, when we talk about that, we don't believe in any third power, mysterious powers, because humanism's life stance are guided by reason, a reason what we call tark, and inspired by passion, what we call karuna, and informed by experience. So you learn, that you earn the knowledge, anubhav, and that's humanism. And what Buddha said, I think the best part is that karuna or that reasoning is that the best part of Buddhism. So it is a philosophy that actually helps human beings. And in the Western world, people call liberation theology for the in the Christian world. But I think for a large part of India, Buddhism has played that role. Why I say when I was discussing about ahimsa or non-violence, so I give you one small incident. Few years back, I was participating in a huge congregation. There were nearly 25,000 people, mostly the tribals, and it was organized by some Gandhian friends. And we thought that we should go there because most of the people are, marginalized, and we should put our viewpoint. And when I saw some old person, the Gandhian man, and when he was speaking to these Adivasis whose land were grabbed and who were actually got nothing, it was Madhya Pradesh. And this Gandhian friend was, he went and he spoke. He says, हम लोग बड़े अहिंसक हैं, हमको कुछ नहीं करना है, बस सरकार हम पे थोड़ा सी कृपा कर दे, बड़े लोग थोड़ा कृपा कर दे तो हमारे लिए तो वही बहुत है. Like, it was very patronizing. It was a patronizing statement. I was just very disturbed with this. I say, who are we going to teach non-violence? And there is the question then comes, is the non-violence, if the non-violence is being taught to the people who have suffered and who have been exploited for years by whether classes or caste or ruling, whatever you can call, by a system, that is where I felt the Gandhiji's non-violence may be a good tool against protesting, may have organized people, but it also did not challenge the status quo. It allowed, it made the status quo is the people who had power, the people who enjoyed the hierarchical system. It is they who enjoyed everything. So they are telling the poor who are the victim of the caste system, who are the victim of our Varna Vyavastha, they teach them that, you should be, non-violent. You can't be violent. Now, this is very critical question. Because this question came later in a question form to me, that what happens when there is a political movement, there is a social movement, and if there is a violence, then won't you call it a violence? Now, I give you an example. When Osama bin Laden was killed, somebody asked this question to Honorable Dalai Lama. And then I give you the thing, the story came in The Guardian, in the paper from London. And Dalai Lama ji actually gave example of what is this very specific Buddhist legend, Avalokiteshvara. And where he had different, he's under different names in different countries. In China, some other name, in Tibet, some other name. But he actually, for the sake of the people, he said, first protect the people. First, liberate the people. Then your personal or individual nirvana. So that's also important. That Buddhism is, this speak of individual, but it speaks of community also. Community comes first. So when we all, when we speak about that, we don't believe in God, and we don't believe in any supernatural power, we are only reasoning. Many people actually then say that Buddhism is kind of Marxism. And this was a very interesting conversation of mine. I was in the Central Asian country, which was a former Soviet, part of former Soviet Union, Kyrgyzstan. And there are people, had a lot of Indian narratives. So there was one person, his name was Alexander, and he was discussing things with me. Oh, you have come from a great country and you land of Buddha. And he was like very fascinated. Obviously, Indira Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru are also popular in that part of Soviet, former Soviet Union. So what happened is that he started, because he was a Marxist and of the Soviet era, and he started speaking about that that Buddha was a Marxist. He told me, and I was very upset with him. And I say, how can you call Buddha a Marxist? Buddha was born 2,500 years before Marx. So how do you call Buddha as a Marxist? you can call Marx was a Buddhist. So then he said, oh, sorry, I should correct myself. Yes, you can call Marx was a Buddhist in terms of ideological philosophy. But when we say communism, because many people ask this question, the communist forms of government, the communism. So humanism is not communism. It's because the one thing that differentiate between humanism and communism is one is democracy. Second, about, as a humanist, we don't support any violent revolution, so-called. And third was individual liberty, freedom of choice, freedom of faith, freedom to express your views. And that is where Buddhism also comes. Buddhism gives you that liberty, that freedom. If you see even Sri Lanka, and I've been to Cambodia, I've been to Mongolia, and in Sri Lankan Buddha viharas, you can see a large number of devotees from the Hindu faith. Not devotees, gods from the Hindu faith. Obviously, they have, there is no such thing as hatred generated in the Buddhist philosophy. Some people might, use it, but otherwise, in most of the Buddhist societies, because they respect the local traditions also, and that is why in each country we have a different kind of Buddhism. Everywhere we go, there is a local tradition, local mix-up, and those local traditions have been embraced by it. So for us in India, as Baba Sahab said, and Baba Sahab's belief in revolution was like, he liked many things in the Russian Revolution and Soviet models. If you talk about land reform, if you talk about land as a state subject, as a, not individual property for agrarian purposes, but what was important for him, what he loved about was the French Revolution, and where he is speaking the role of intellectuals also. Secondly, the fraternity part, and he has emphasized it in his book, the fraternity part. He doesn't want, that revolution where you create another sort of enemies, and people are, suffering from hatred all the time. So this is the most powerful statement when we talk about non-violence, or when we talk about ahimsa, that Dr. Ambedkar, who came from that segment of society which suffered because of the caste system, because of the hierarchical system, and yet he spoke of fraternity. I think, and from that position, from the position of Gandhiji, it is easier to say, I want, everybody to be happy, and we should be brothers and sisters, and without leaving your powers and privileges. Here, Dr. Ambedkar was talking about fraternity and equality. So equality is the important part, but equality along with fraternity, and that is what Buddhism is. It is not spreading hatred. It is not taking you to dark ages where, Buddha himself never claimed as a son of God, or father of God, or messenger of God. So all the religions in the world actually have either the godmen or their children in the form of Bhudevatas in India, who claim that they have the license from the God, and they can decide whatever they do. And the other religion, which are particularly the Abrahamic religion, where either there is a Messiah who comes and liberate the people. So it is Buddha who is saying, liberation is basically through knowledge, through wisdom. Basically, when we say, even this point also is very important of Buddha. It's not merely knowledge. He is not keen on that merely knowledge. For Buddhism is enlightenment. So the enlightenment is more important, because knowledge sometimes there are many knowledgeable people in India. All the civil servants are very knowledgeable. All the big successful, so-called successful businessmen or individuals, they may be very knowledgeable, may not be enlightened, because many times in the Indian, at least Indian social structure, we have seen knowledge was used to suppress, to oppress the people, the communities. So the Brahmins had knowledge. Definitely, they claim that they had knowledge. And what did they use this knowledge for? Or the Sanskrit language, which was termed as the language of knowledge, and there was so much of stuff inside this Sanskrit. But what happened in that system? That was barred, prohibited. Except for the Brahmins, none other were allowed to read or learn from Sanskrit. So you have a knowledge, you have a bank, knowledge bank, but you don't want other people to access it. You only want to yourself to have. That means your knowledge is to control others. Your knowledge is to suppress others, to oppress others. You find ways and means and narratives and definition to justify the injustice. And that is how the injustice came to India in our lives, because we created the theory of karma, the theory of all the gospels, that the sins of the previous birth, and that's why you are in particular jati or varna. And that is where, if you see the Buddha said nobody can be a Brahmin by birth. And his whole treatise, if you see, he is speaking very clearly. And when he used the term Sanskrit, Prakrit language, it was basically that he democratized the knowledge system. See, when we say humanism, we are essentially talking about democracy and individual freedom. And it is Buddha, when he spoke so many thousand years back, he is speaking about knowledge system in the local language, the people's language, against a knowledge system that was domain of particular communities and particular jatis. So that is important. We have to see even in today's world, when we talk about what could be the philosophy for the world, and the best way is the Madhyamarg of Buddha, the middle path. Any kind of extreme views, that my view is the best one and yours is the worst, and my religion is the best, yours is the worst. We are witnessing this in today's time, when people have started believing in those gospel truths, gossips and all those stories made to justify the violence, made to justify the killings, made to justify the illogical things. We have started following that too in today's time. And there is a revivalism of the religious rights in our part of the world, in our neighborhood, in our neighboring countries, everywhere. And there is this to increase the blind faith, to make people blind to other people's needs, and to create a situation where anybody differing with your view is considered as an enemy or as an obstacle. I think in this point in time, Dr. Ambedkar's revivalism of Buddhism in India, and his defining Buddha as a common person's hero, as a man who felt that everybody has a right to get knowledge, education. Everybody has right to learn, and there are so many aspects of Buddhism in India that has liberated people. And any ism must be understood in terms of how much people accepted that. So if in India we say the ahimsa as preached by Gandhiji, how much or how many of those who actually believed in Gandhiji's non-violence, really believed that, because that non-violence cannot be explained in a utopian term. It has to be explained in whether we are able to create a space which is democratic, which is liberated, which is not violative of anybody's human rights. So at the one point you say that the caste system or the Varna Vyavastha is, God-given. So when one side we justify it, and this Varna Vyavastha has unleashed violence, which violence may not be physical in terms that way. It was physical also, but it is also a mental violence. It is a torture. And if we ignore that aspect, so non-violence cannot be just an event management thing, that I believe in non-violence, I worship ahimsa, and that's a thing. Non-violence has to be seen how it is used as a public, as a political tool, as a social tool. And that way, Buddhism and Ambedkarism in India, I would say that way, has succeeded. They have shown that they don't suffer from hatred. They don't suffer from any contempt. They are ready to give the world a new dynamics. Ambedkarites have shown the world actually, and this is the day to celebrate that success story of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, how Buddhism has changed the lives of millions of people in India as they follow ahimsa, as they follow non-violence, as they follow the path of reasoning and the path of what we call passion, compassion towards your fellow being. So this is the biggest change. The other side, if we see, when Gandhiji was addressing to the so-called Savarnas or upper caste, none of them has followed that path. Most of them still believe in their caste system. Most of them has not let off the hatred towards the marginalized sections of society. Most of the laws that has been made in the post-independent India for the benefit of the marginalized sections are diluted or are not implemented, because in the power structure are these fellows who are not ready to leave aside their caste prejudices and caste privileges. So non-violence cannot happen without creating a congenial atmosphere and without, for those who are in power structure. For the marginalized, if they are protesting somewhere, they are sitting on a dharna or a protest, and they asking for their demand, asking to get justice, you cannot term their sometime irritation or some protest which turn violence as a violence. Violence is a philosophy, and this philosophy has been in our religious textbook, which has justified. We not normally justified all these things. Babasaheb Ambedkar has written most of the time about these social cultural violence on India's Bahujan Samaj. So unless we talk about participation in our structure, in power structure, in social structure, in cultural spaces, unless there is a ideology of Bahujan Sukhai and Bahujan Hitai, we can not really claim that ahimsa, which Gandhiji spread, is a part of our life. But yes, I can say this with the conviction that if Baba Sahib has not used ahimsa as a tool, and it is one of the biggest, why I call it revolution in India, because Dalits had every right to protest, even if that is violently, that point in time, because of their sufferings, because of their exploitation, whether it's caste-based or anything else, they had a right to protest. And it is here Dr. Ambedkar's whole philosophy work that brought them to respect Constitution. If we in post-independent India analyze the whole protest by the marginalized communities, most of these protests have been very peaceful. Unless the state turned violent, people have never revolted. Of course, there is when the police and the state turn their eyes off from them, there might be sometime there might be violence, sporadic violence, but that cannot be called as a philosophy of violence. So, because most of the political protests have this term because of various reasons, because of the state's failure, because of the failure of the political leadership. So, I would say that when we call Bahujan Hitai, this philosophy, Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, the whole Buddhist philosophy, people are following it, and we have seen that we see this is the period where we go to Nagpur and Chandrapur, the historic day, how people have followed up, they have created in humanism also, and that is a similarity I'm talking about, like the weddings in Maharashtra, the Buddhist weddings, the Buddhist cremation ceremonies, the same kind of things have started by the humanists in UK, in the Scandinavian countries. They are not following the religious path, whether by church or any other thing. They have their own humanist wedding, humanist cremations, humanist naming ceremonies, where there is no place for a priest to do things for them. So people are globally realizing, and only those societies are enlightened where people have got those freedom. And most of the Western world in Europe, people are coming to humanism and Buddhism together actually, because it is the both they don't want to be dictated by the religious gurus or by the priests. They want to be dictated by their own reasoning and the compassion for the other people. And I think for India also, we have seen in the last so many years how the religious rights are the caste forces, the Manuvadi forces, I would say, they have grown up and they are trying to push their agenda, and through not only by the law, but also, in socially, they have started asserting themselves again and again. So this is a dangerous thing, and they know that ideologically, again, the same thing is coming up. When the Brahmanism was weak, because of the ideology, it could not face the philosophy of Buddhism, and that's why the violence happened. The Buddhism was non-violent. It was the Brahmanism which was violent. It created philosophies that justified violence, that justified killings. And I don't want to name these all those texts. As an Ambedkarite, as Buddhist, we all know where is the violence emerging. And violence is, as I said, not merely somebody is hitting at someone. It is the institutional violence. Caste system is a violence. Untouchability is a violence. So even if somebody is not complaining, we have to see that this violence is there, and we need to expose this, and we need to provide people alternative also, because there is a reality. Those people are opposing it, but people still are part of it. It is important for people to get out of it. The most important part is, and that is where I am very passionate about saying this thing, that Babasaheb Ambedkar, when he decided that this is our path, this is a Navyan, the new way of life, we must all join hand, and we must all join this path of liberation. That is the only liberation, because otherwise we are fighting for this temple, that temple, this god, that god, and most of the time people complain and people still want to be there. It is if you want to be a part of an enlightened society, and as Babasaheb Ambedkar said, Prabuddha Bharat, I think the humanism and humanism as taught by Buddha, as taught by Babasaheb Ambedkar, are the only way out for all of us. So I would stop here, and hopefully if there are questions, I would be happy to respond.
Hello.
Hello, Mangesh bhai.
Vidyabhushan Bhai Sahab, that is in a very short period of time, you covered a lot of ground. Starting, starting from the very definition of humanism and Buddhism, and how they are the two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
and how people in the West have understood the idea of humanism. I think that was something that we need to understand today at a very deeper level. The relationship between Buddhism and Brahmanism, not just as a religious Buddhism and humanism, not just as a religious philosophy, but something that is so beneficial for people to bring out their humanness.
Yes.
And Baba Sahib Ambedkar has said something very nicely, quoting Kabir, that you are trying to become a divine, you're trying to become a sadhu, but first try to become a human being.
Yes. Yes.
So everybody is trying to aspire to divinity and forgetting that, first of all, they have to become the human beings. And I think that is a very good point that you have brought into. I was very interested, brother. This is a question to you about the take on violence.
Yeah.
And anger, the concept of anger itself, that people try to dismiss something as angry or full of anger. But now the new psychology says that anger doesn't necessarily mean that it's a negative emotion. It can have that energy. There can be a positive anger also.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the anger driven for the goal of positive transformation, which Baba Ambedkar has called Prem Mulak. Anger motivated by love, and there is hatred mulak. So how do you see the violence and non-violence concept in both humanism and Buddhism, and how do we relate that to Indian situation? You have spoken about it, but I would like to.
I was telling you that when people protest, we have to see the location of the person also. Because as I said, when Gandhiji spoke about non-violence, and I'm saying that today, all those who are claiming to be Gandhian or impressed with his work, I'm not denying his importance in Indian thing. That is there. But what I'm saying is, as a philosopher, if we call him a philosopher, I don't call him. Really, I have all respect, but I don't call him a philosopher. That is the part I don't like. He may be a political leader, India's, under whom we fought our freedom movement. That's fine for me. But as a philosopher, he's a completely failure, because at the one side we are justifying the caste system. So I'm saying that violence sometimes may not be, you may not see it in terms of physicality. See what's happening like in our television channels. The hatred in our television channels is being brought, and if Mangesh ji respond to that, they say, "Arey, inhone to hamara jawab kaise de diya?" So that is also a violence. Because they normalize violence, they normalize hatred. You see the whole thing. If you go and just Google search the what you call history of Rwanda. Just about 20-30 years back, how many thousand people were killed there, and it was a big ethnic war, ethnic genocide. And in that genocide was created by the people, and there were normalization of violence. There were normalization of the whole discourse. So what is happening in India is today, that is, violence has become norm, and it is the narratives. Narratives become important. So, and truth is hidden somewhere. So if the Dalits are protesting, say Khairlaji, in Maharashtra, Khairlaji happened.
Yes.
And in Khairlaji, there was an anger among people. That anger was important. If people don't protest, the state will never respond. They never respond. So people protested, and the 2 days when the Maharashtra was burning, the state responded. Obviously, we know that state has its own tendency in India, and they today, that time it was not that cruel, but today it has become more systematic. Like if a Khairlaji happened today, the police will file cases against the victims rather than filing the cases against the culprits, because you are protesting. So what is happening is that it's very clever way of the power elite. So they will deny you justice, they will deny you right, and if you come on the street, and they will deliver where people become tireless or maybe restless, and some of them might turn violent. Some might say someone pathar phek diya, kuch phek diya, and then there is a media which define this as a violence. And then they will ask you question, oh, you call yourself a humanist, are you with this violence? अरे भाई violence कहाँ है? Violence is by the state.
सही.
Violence, it cannot happen because even in Chauri Chaura, which I wrote long back a paper on Chauri Chaura, when Chauri Chaura incident happened, how can, Gandhi ji said, oh, ये तो बहुत बड़ा, violence हो गया, all these things. People, are killing, the police forces were killing, most of those people who were killed were actually Dalits.
Wow.
They were fighting against for their basic, because it was a fight of land owners versus, the small farmers. Most of these were the Dalits, the backward classes people, the Muslims also, Dalit Muslims. And they were demanding for, because there were a lot of taxes and not much happening to them. And the police force also came, and most of the policemen were actually the upper caste that time. And they killed, they fired, and when brutally suppressed the whole movement. And when the people don't have any solution, violence happens where the negotiations finish.
Yeah, very true.
That is why the Madhya Marg is always the most important part of Buddha's actual, I can tell you, even in today's time, for everyone, this middle path is the only way. Cannot be other. So there is, I say that, in philosophy, there is no violence. But it doesn't mean that when there is a injustice, people will turn. And there are some explanation about it also in Tibetan, in Chinese, in all other countries where Buddhism is a part. These countries to have the armed forces.
Yes.
They also have to manage things.
Yeah.
They believe in Buddhism, but definitely Buddha never said that we accept the injustice, everything. That's not
Buddhist way of.
Yeah, it cannot be.
Yeah. You're right.
The only thing is that how people are defining violence today.
Yeah.
Because if I say there is a television channel which is actually all the time abusing people, creating nuisance, creating an environment of violence, will that be called a violence or not? And I think it is time now we have to start this violence, non-violent debate again. And a broader debate whether spreading hatred towards people is violence or not, spreading fake news is a violence or not. That's
definitely a violence. And
also, when people are protesting for their fundamental rights, and the state doesn't listen to them, and it's say Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand, where Adivasis are taken off. There may be some violence, some sporadic thing, because who created the circumstances for this violence? And unless we go into depth of that, that why are it that the Adivasis took up a gun or a Dalit took up a gun and in some certain places, it's not that in 20 crore people, if one person pick up a gun and 10% pick up this, but what are the circumstances that resulted in his picking up gun?
Right.
It's important to know. It's not the end thing that he picked up the gun, but why he picked up the gun is more important.
That's the question. So I think this very fascinating discussion, Brother Vidyabhushan. It's always a delight to listen to you. I was thinking about, do you trace any history of humanism in this country, and whether that synced with Buddhism? Is there a history of humanism in this country, and did it ever sync with the Buddhist movement or the philosophy of the Buddha here in this country?
Actually, the term humanism, they started in the very late stage. It's not, but the first time this term was used actually by Amin Roy. If in the modern sense, in the 50s, he was one of the person who was part of the international humanist movement, but he has written about Buddhism. There are a lot of work that he has done, and he was the only Marxist actually who spoke about caste system and who was very close with Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar.
You related once a story. Can you tell that story? How Dr. Ambedkar?
Actually, Dr. You see, this story came into my understanding in the 90s when Arun Sori wrote that book, Worshipping the False God.
Mhm.
And people were upset. We all were very upset. And I got the book and I said, I want to read what is there. And when I started reading, Arun Sori got, inspired, whatever say, to write this book because he got a paper somewhere. He got some note that Dr. Ambedkar, as the member of Viceroy's Labour
Yeah.
Council, yeah,
Mhm.
he has sanctioned some 13,000 rupees
Mhm.
for the Marxian Way, the magazine that Amin Roy was editing.
Mhm.
And Arun Sori called, because Roy was critical of Gandhi, and that point in time in 1930, he called Gandhi a fascist.
Mhm.
Can you imagine somebody is writing in his book
Hmm.
that in fascism in India will be cultural.
Mhm.
And he wrote this.
That
whole-
time.
Yeah, that time in 30s.
Yeah, it's coming
He
to
wrote
today.
that, he wrote is that fascism in India will be cultural because you are creating a whole image of Gandhi as a messiah
Mhm.
and, to liberate India. And this is what Hitler did.
Mhm.
And then he questioned about the so-called, the uniformity, like the dress code of
Mhm.
Gandhi, the Khaddar and all those things. And he questioned that this is the trying to unify, homogenize whole people.
Mhm.
And create a sense that those who wear the khadi
Mhm.
are superior to others.
Right,
So that
right,
is what
right.
Hitler did with his uniform culture.
Mhm.
Because those who are wearing those uniforms were like, we are superior to others and we are different. And there were many things created around Gandhi. The myths created around Gandhi was not merely political myths. There was many spiritual stories about Gandhi.
Mhm.
So Amin Roy was getting this thing, and I saw that Sori said that since Roy was anti-Gandhi
Hmm.
and Ambedkar was also anti like Gandhi, he said, and he said that anybody who opposed Gandhi was anti-India. So
Mhm.
that was the whole theory of that book was
Mhm.
since Dr. Ambedkar has been a critique of Gandhi,
Mhm.
and so that was necessarily he was a British stooge kind of thing. And then he made his own philosophy. He used different angles were coming. He used also Jagjivan Ram's booklet by Jagjivan Ram's wife.
Mhm.
Now I never knew that Indrani Ram, Meera Kumar's mother, was such a big writer that Arun Sori quote
Mhm.
in his book that Dr.
Yeah.
Ambedkar would come to her place and requesting Babuji to get a connection with Gandhiji and all those kind of things. So I said this is too much. So this I later in the International Humanist Forum there was one thing, they were using Buddha. Buddha was there, and they had like there was a conference in India in Mumbai, I think in 90s.
Mhm.
And that time they had a place like Phule, Periyar, Bhagat Singh, and Buddha. And there was no Ambedkar. And I questioned it.
Mhm.
I was not part of that time, but when somebody sent me a poster,
Mhm.
I questioned it. He says, no, Baba Sahib became, Buddhist, but he followed the rituals.
Mhm.
So I say, what is that? What is your problem with that? He followed the rituals or not rituals, but if I give you the 22 bows, that is humanism.
Mhm. That's
So
true.
that is humanism.
Yeah.
And that's why I came across a very interesting pieces of John Davey also
Mhm.
about this. And many times we become so rigid. As some time back, I wrote this piece on festivals also. And I tell people, no, we should not be rigid. Because if we become rigid, then we leave our own people.
True.
So there are 20 crores of Dalits and there are nearly 70 crores of OBCs in India. And if you just, throw them away, that, you are all, whatever you are celebrating is bad, you have to change them slowly. But if we just leave these spaces, like Baba Sahib defined this is Ashoka Vijayadashmi, we say. And I can tell you that if he had left that, people still come on the Dasera day on the Diksha Bhumi. And that's the important point. Otherwise, you will leave these spaces to be used by the Sangha Parivar and the Brahminical forces. They will be the first one to go to the village, make a temple, and say, "Aao bhaiya karo kaam." So this is how. So in India, I can say, and globally, it is now accepted Buddha is a humanist, that is well established thing. Baba Sahib also I wrote long back, and now they have started, because I gave them a lot of examples. So Baba Sahib, Periyar, Phule, Bhagat Singh, all they are in Indian terms. We say that without reading them, we cannot understand humanism.
True. Vidya Bhushan Bhai Sahab, that was lovely to listen to you and understand from you the quest of Buddhism to create a more humanistic society. And I remember a letter which Baba Sahib Ambedkar wrote to someone about Buddhism. He said that he likes humanistic Buddhism than monastic Buddhism.
Yeah.
So the concept of human-centric Buddhism, the Buddhism for here and now, for the human world, this idea has been picking up for some time. And I think your discussion, particularly in terms of how Buddhism should have that approach of humanism grounded in the humanistic philosophy, I think is wonderful presentation, brother. And we would like to invite you again. Thank you for joining us. Before we part away, any parting words?
Thank you very much, and it is always a pleasure to be. And that is where I tell our friends that don't waste your energy in critiquing something else which are not your part. Be part of this Buddhism, this humanism, and be constructive in your things. You work in a very constructive way. Otherwise, there are a lot of ways to divert your attention and kill your energy, I would say. Because I have seen this, and I can say this, many of the people are they are full of anger, and that anger is against the system, the Brahminical system. I tell them, see, that is, I can understand that you apply somewhere, you face something, but you come out of this, at least this cultural aspect. So once you come out of it, there are like well-known studies that most of the people who embrace Buddhism, who are part of it, are far better, not only intellectually, but also like, in terms of, you find their faces happy. Otherwise, I see the people are all the time. I don't want to be unhappy all the time.
Right.
I want to enjoy life. I want to go here and there, meet people, enjoy. I don't want to live a life all 50, 60, 70 years in depression. And so best way is, create your own communities.
Right.
And the best way is here. You have created, Baba Sahib has given us the way. So why, if we say I'm an Ambedkarite, then please follow the path.
True. Thank you so much, brother. And we are looking forward to have you here once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya.
Brother, thank you so much.